The dust cloud rising from the stagecoach wheels settled on the main street of Shoshone City, Wyoming territory. And when the door swung open, Zelda Martinez stepped down into a world that would never welcome her with open arms. She carried a worn leather satchel in one hand and clutched a faded photograph in the other, her dark eyes scanning the unfamiliar faces that gathered to witness the arrival of strangers. It was May of 1878, and the spring sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden buildings lining the street. Zelda's black hair was pulled back in an intricate braid. Woven with small, colorful ribbons in the Spanish tradition her mother had taught her back in Santa Fe. Her dress, though dusty from travel, was unmistakably different from what the local women wore, with embroidered flowers along the hem and sleeves, bright reds and yellows that seemed to offend the muted sensibilities of this small Wyoming town. She had come to Shoshone City because her uncle, Ramon Martinez, owned a small mercantile on the edge of town. He had written to her family after her father's death, offering Zelda work and a fresh start. At 22 years old, she had little choice but to accept. Her mother had remarried quickly, and her new stepfather made it clear there was no room for a grown daughter in his household. So Zelda had packed her few belongings, sewn her mother's silver cross into the lining of her best dress, and boarded the stagecoach heading north into territory she had only read about in newspapers. "You must be Zelda," a weathered man with kind eyes approached her. He was short and broad-shouldered with gray streaking through his black hair. "I am Ramon, your uncle. Welcome to Shoshone City." She embraced him quickly, grateful for a familiar face. "Thank you for having me, uncle. The journey was long. Come, I will show you to your room above the store. You must be exhausted." He grabbed her satchel and led her down the street, and Zelda felt the weight of curious stares following her every step. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men tipped their hats, but their eyes were cold, assessing. She held her head high, refusing to shrink under their scrutiny. The mercantile was small but well-stocked, with shelves lined with canned goods, fabric, tools, and various sundries. Ramon showed her to a modest room upstairs, furnished with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small wardrobe. A single window overlooked the street below. "It is not much, but it is yours," Ramon said apologetically. "Tomorrow I will show you how everything works in the store. For now, rest." That night, as Zelda lay in the unfamiliar bed, she heard voices drifting up from the saloon across the street. Laughter, piano music, the occasional shout. She wondered if she had made a terrible mistake coming here. But she had no money to return home and no home to return to. This was her life now, whether she liked it or not. The next morning, Ramon woke her before dawn. They had breakfast together in the small kitchen behind the store, cornmeal porridge that Zelda flavored with cinnamon from her own supplies. Ramon raised his eyebrows at the taste, but said nothing. "The people here, they are not accustomed to those who are different," Ramon warned her as they prepared to open the store. "They will test you. You must be patient." "I have done nothing wrong," Zelda said firmly. "I will work hard and earn their respect." Ramon smiled sadly. "Sometimes that is not enough, niece, but I admire your spirit." The first customers arrived mid-morning, two women in their 30s wearing identical expressions of barely concealed disdain. They needed fabric for new curtains, they said, but they spent more time examining Zelda than the bolts of cloth Ramon displayed. "You are Ramon's niece from New Mexico territory?" one of them asked, her tone suggesting Zelda might have crawled out from under a rock. "Yes, madam. From Santa Fe." "How exotic!" The word dripped with condescension. "I suppose they do things very differently down there." "Some things are different, some are the same," Zelda replied evenly. "People need curtains everywhere." The woman's eyes narrowed. Indeed, we will take the blue calico, Ramon. Have it delivered to the house. After they left, Ramon sighed. That was Martha Henderson and her sister Claire. Their father owns the bank. They are influential in town. They were rude. They are always rude to everyone who is not like them. The days that followed established a pattern. Customers came to the mercantile because they needed supplies, but they treated Zelda like a curiosity, something foreign and potentially dangerous. They criticized the way she spoke, with its slight Spanish accent. They made comments about her embroidered dresses. When she began cooking meals for herself and Ramon, using the spices and techniques her mother had taught her, the smells drifting from the kitchen window brought more disapproving looks than compliments. 2 weeks after her arrival, Zelda was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the store when a group of children ran past, chanting in sing-song voices. Mexican girl, go back where you came from, Mexican girl. She stopped sweeping and watched them scatter down the street, her throat tight with anger and hurt. Do not let them bother you, Ramon said from the doorway. Children repeat what they hear at home. I am American, Zelda said quietly. My family has lived in New Mexico for 5 generations. We were there before this was even a country. I know. But to them, you will always be other. That afternoon, a tall man entered the store and Zelda looked up from the inventory she was taking. He was lean and weathered, probably in his mid-20s, with dark blonde hair that needed cutting and blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. He wore dusty work clothes and scuffed boots, a battered hat in his hands. Afternoon, he said, nodding to both Zelda and Ramon. I need some tobacco and a new pair of work gloves. Of course, Mr. O'Brien, Ramon said warmly. Zelda, this is Tobias O'Brien. He works at the Fletcher Ranch north of town. Tobias, my niece Zelda Martinez. Tobias met her eyes directly, and Zelda was surprised by the genuine warmth there. Pleased to meet you, Miss Martinez. Welcome to Shoshone City. Thank you, she said, unused to such simple courtesy. While Ramon gathered the tobacco, Zelda helped Tobias find gloves that fit his large hands. These should work, she said, handing him a sturdy leather pair. Much obliged. He paid for his purchases, then hesitated at the door. I hope folks are treating you well. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her composure. As well as can be expected. He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. Small towns can be hard places for anyone different. But they will come around. Usually. After he left, Ramon chuckled. Tobias is a good man. Works harder than anyone at the Fletcher Ranch. Honest, reliable. He has been saving money to buy his own land someday. Zelda found herself thinking about Tobias O'Brien more than she should have. There had been something steady about him, something that made her feel less alone in this hostile place. The following Sunday, Ramon insisted Zelda attend church with him. She wore her best dress, the one with her mother's silver cross sewn into it, and braided her hair with the traditional ribbons. The moment she walked into the small white church, conversation stopped. Every head turned. Martha Henderson's lips pursed in disapproval. Claire whispered something to her neighbor. Zelda and Ramon found seats near the back. The Reverend, a thin man with wire spectacles, gave a sermon about loving thy neighbor, but Zelda noticed he kept glancing at her with barely concealed discomfort. When the service ended, most people filed out without speaking to them. A few nodded politely to Ramon but ignored Zelda entirely. Outside, in the bright sunshine, Martha Henderson approached with her sister in tow. Ramon, I must speak with you about your niece. What about her? Ramon asked, his voice carefully neutral. Her appearance is unseemly. Those ribbons in her hair, that embroidery on her dress. This is a respectable community. We have standards. Heat flooded Zelda's face. My dress is perfectly modest, madam. It is foreign, Martha said, as if that explained everything. It makes people uncomfortable. Then perhaps those people should examine why they are so easily made uncomfortable, a familiar voice said. Tobias O'Brien had appeared beside them, still in his Sunday clothes, though they were worn and patched in places. Miss Martinez's dress is no more unusual than Mrs. Garrett's hat with the stuffed bird on it, but I do not hear you criticizing her fashion choices. Martha's face reddened. How dare you, Tobias O'Brien? This is not your concern. Actually, madam, it is. When I see someone being treated unfairly, I consider it very much my concern. His voice was polite but firm. Miss Martinez has every right to wear what she chooses and to honor her heritage. Seems to me that her differences make our community richer, not poorer. We could all stand to learn something from people who have different experiences. Claire stepped forward, her eyes flashing. You would defend this foreigner over your own people. She is my own people, Tobias said quietly. She is American, same as you and me. And even if she was not, basic human decency costs nothing. Martha made a disgusted sound and swept away, her sister following. Several other townspeople had gathered to watch the exchange, their expressions ranging from disapproval to carefully hidden amusement. Zelda looked at Tobias, her heart pounding. No one had ever defended her like that, especially not a stranger. Thank you, she managed. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did, he said simply. He turned his hat in his hands, suddenly looking a bit awkward. Would you and your uncle care to join me for lunch? There is a decent restaurant on Pine Street, my treat to welcome you properly to town. Ramon glanced at Zelda, a knowing smile playing at his lips. That is very kind, but I have inventory to finish. Zelda, you should go. You have worked hard all week. So Zelda found herself walking down the street beside Tobias O'Brien, acutely aware of the stares they attracted. The restaurant was small and clean, run by a widow named Mrs. Cooper who nodded politely as they entered. Over roasted chicken and potatoes, Tobias asked about her life in Santa Fe, and Zelda found herself talking more freely than she had in weeks. She told him about her father's small ranch, about learning to ride almost before she could walk, about her mother's garden and the way the light looked on the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. It sounds beautiful, Tobias said. I have never been that far south. Where are you from originally? Iowa. My parents had a farm there, but it failed during the drought of '72. My father died of a fever that winter, and my mother followed 6 months later. I was 18, my sister was 16. We sold what little we had and came west. She married a shopkeeper in Cheyenne. I kept moving, looking for a place that felt like home. Have you found it? He considered the question carefully. Not yet, but I am working toward it. I have been saving every penny I can. Another year or two, and I will have enough to file a homestead claim and start building something of my own. Zelda admired his determination. What will you raise? Cattle, mostly. Maybe some horses. The land up north past the Fletcher Ranch, there is good grazing there. Water, too. I have had my eye on a particular valley for a while now. They talked until the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, and Zelda realized she had not laughed so much since leaving Santa Fe. Tobias had a dry wit and a way of telling stories that brought his experiences to life. He was educated too, she discovered. His mother had been a schoolteacher and had made sure both her children could read and write and cipher. I should get back, Zelda said reluctantly. Uncle Ramon will think I have abandoned him. Tobias paid for the meal and walked her back to the mercantile. At the door he hesitated. Miss Martinez, I was wondering if you might allow me to call on you sometime. Properly, I mean. Zelda's heart skipped. I would like that very much, Mr. O'Brien. Tobias, please. Then you must call me Zelda, he smiled, and it transformed his serious face. Zelda, it is a beautiful name. After he left, Ramon gave her a sly look. He is a good man, that one, honest and hardworking. We just had lunch, uncle, do not marry me off yet. But she could not stop smiling for the rest of the day. Tobias began coming by the mercantile regularly, always with some excuse to purchase supplies. He would linger, talking with Zelda about everything and nothing. He told her about his work at the ranch, the cattle drives, the challenges of managing livestock in the harsh Wyoming weather. She told him about learning to cook from her mother, about the festivals and traditions of her childhood, about her dreams of someday having a garden as beautiful as the one her mother had tended. The town noticed, of course. Tongues wagged. Martha Henderson made her disapproval abundantly clear, spreading gossip that Tobias was throwing his life away on a foreign girl who would never fit in. But Tobias seemed unbothered by the talk. If anything, the opposition made him more determined. One evening, about a month after they met, Tobias arrived at the mercantile just as Zelda was closing up. "I thought you might like to go for a ride," he said. "It is a beautiful evening and there is something I would like to show you." He had brought a gentle mare for her, already saddled. They rode out of town as the sun began to set, heading north into the rolling hills. Zelda had not been on a horse since arriving in Wyoming, and the familiar rhythm of riding eased something tight in her chest. This was something she knew, something that connected her to home. Tobias led her to a rise overlooking a green valley. A creek ran through it, lined with cottonwood trees. The grass was lush, and she could see deer grazing in the distance. "This is it," Tobias said quietly. "This is the land I want to claim, 160 acres of possibility." Zelda could see why he loved it. The valley was sheltered from the worst winds, had good water, and the grass would support a decent herd. "It is perfect," she said. "I wanted you to see it," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "Because I have been thinking about the future a lot lately, about what I want to build here, and I keep imagining it with you beside me." He turned to face her, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know this town has not made you feel welcome. But Zelda, you are the finest woman I have ever met. You are brave and strong and kind. You honor your heritage without apology, and that makes me admire you even more. When Martha Henderson said your differences made you unsuitable, all I could think was how wrong she was. Your differences make you extraordinary. They would make any home richer." Zelda's eyes stung with unexpected tears. "Tobias, I am not asking for an answer now," he continued quickly. "I just wanted you to know what I am thinking, what I am hoping for. If you could see yourself here, building a life with me, then I will work twice as hard to make it happen. I will file that claim next month and start building a house. A real house, not just a dugout or a shanty, something worthy of you." She reached out and took his hand. His palm was calloused from hard work, warm and steady. "I can see it," she said softly. "I can see myself here with you." His face lit up with joy. "Truly, truly. You are the only person in this town who has treated me like I matter, like I am more than just someone to gossip about. You defend me, you listen to me, you see me. How could I not care for you?" Tobias squeezed her hand gently. "I will make you happy, Zelda. I swear it." They sat together on the hillside as the stars came out, talking about their plans, their dreams. Zelda described the kind of garden she wanted to plant, with vegetables from her mother's seeds that she had brought from Santa Fe, and flowers to attract hummingbirds. Tobias talked about the house he would build, with a real wood floor and glass windows and a porch where they could sit in the evenings. When they rode back to town, Zelda felt lighter than she had in months. She had a future now, something to hope for. But the town was not done testing them. Word spread quickly about their courtship, and the gossip grew more vicious. Women whispered that Zelda was using her foreign ways to bewitch poor Tobias. Men warned him that he was making a mistake, that he could never trust someone so different. The minister even pulled him aside one Sunday to express his concerns about marrying outside his own kind. Tobias bore it all with patient determination, but Zelda could see it wearing on him. She did not want to be the cause of his alienation from the community. "Maybe we should wait," she said one afternoon as they sat in the small parlor behind the mercantile. Ramon had discreetly given them privacy, until people have time to adjust to the idea. "No," Tobias said firmly. "I will not let small-minded gossip dictate my life, or yours. Besides, I filed the homestead claim yesterday. I am starting the house next week. The Fletcher brothers are giving me time off to work on it, and a few of the ranch hands have offered to help with the heavy lifting." "They have?" Zelda was surprised. She had assumed everyone disapproved. "Not everyone in this town is like Martha Henderson," Tobias said. "There are good people here too. They are just quieter about it." He was right. Over the following weeks, as Tobias worked on building the house in the valley, several people surprised Zelda with their kindness. Mrs. Cooper from the restaurant began speaking to her at church, asking about her recipes. A young mother named Sarah Williams came into the mercantile and shyly asked if Zelda could teach her the embroidery technique she used on her dresses. An older rancher named George Peterson made a point of telling Tobias, loudly and in public, that he thought Zelda was a fine young woman, and anyone who said otherwise was a damn fool. But the opposition remained vocal too. Martha Henderson organized a meeting of the Church Ladies' Society specifically to discuss the moral concerns of Tobias's engagement to a foreigner. The banker, Martha's father, suggested to Ramon that it might be better for business if Zelda returned to New Mexico. Even the sheriff, a lazy man who generally avoided conflict, mentioned to Tobias that mixed marriages often led to trouble. Through it all, Tobias remained steadfast. Every Sunday after church, he and Zelda would ride out to the valley to check on the progress of the house. It was rising from the earth like a promise, solid and real. Tobias had designed it with care, with a large kitchen because he knew how much Zelda loved to cook, and a bedroom for them and 2 smaller rooms for children they might have someday. The thought of children, of building a family with this man, filled Zelda with a hope so fierce, it sometimes frightened her. One Saturday in late July, Martha Henderson came into the mercantile with her sister and 3 other women from the church. Zelda was alone. Ramon had gone to Cheyenne for supplies and would not be back until evening. "We need to speak with you," Martha announced without preamble. Zelda set down the bolt of fabric she had been measuring. "How can I help you?" "You can help by leaving Shoshone City," Claire said bluntly. "You do not belong here." The other women murmured agreement. Zelda felt her stomach drop, but she kept her voice steady. "I have every right to be here. This is my uncle's store and I work for him." "You are corrupting a good man," Martha said. "Tobias O'Brien has prospects. He could marry a decent local girl. Instead, he is throwing his future away on you." "Tobias is an adult who makes his own decisions," Zelda replied, her anger rising. "He chooses to be with me because we care for each other." "You have bewitched him somehow," one of the other women said, "with your foreign cooking and your strange ways." "There is nothing strange about honoring my heritage," Zelda said firmly. "And there is nothing wrong with sharing my culture with someone who appreciates it. Tobias says my differences make our community richer. Perhaps you should consider that." Martha's eyes flashed. "Do not quote Tobias's foolish words at me. He is under your spell. Once he comes to his senses, he will see you for what you are." "And what am I exactly?" Zelda challenged, stepping around the counter to face them directly. She was shaking with rage now, but she refused to back down. I am a woman who works hard, who treats people with respect, who has done nothing to deserve your hatred except exist. What exactly is my crime? Having a Spanish surname, speaking with an accent, wearing embroidered dresses, cooking with spices you do not recognize. Your crime is not knowing your place, Martha said coldly. This town has a certain way of doing things. We have standards and traditions. You disrupt that. Then perhaps your standards need disrupting, Zelda shot back. If your traditions include treating people cruelly for being different, then they are not worth preserving. Martha raised her hand as if to slap her, but Zelda caught her wrist. Do not, she said quietly. I have been patient with your insults and your gossip. But I will not tolerate physical violence. The women stared at her in shock, as if they could not believe she had the audacity to defend herself. After a long, tense moment, Martha jerked her hand away. You will regret this, she hissed. My father owns half this town. We will make your life here impossible. You already have, Zelda said wearily, but I am still here, and I am not leaving. The women swept out in a rustle of skirts, and Zelda sank onto the stool behind the counter, her legs suddenly weak. She had never stood up to someone so directly before, and the confrontation had left her shaken. But she also felt a strange sense of pride. She had not cowered. She had not apologized for existing. When Ramon returned that evening, she told him what had happened. He listened gravely, his weathered face creased with concern. The Hendersons are powerful in this town, he said. They can make things difficult. I know. But I am tired of being afraid, Uncle, tired of trying to make myself smaller so other people are more comfortable. Ramon smiled and patted her hand. You sound like your grandmother. She was a fierce woman too, never backed down from anyone. What should I do? What you have been doing. Hold your head high, live your life. The people worth knowing will come around, the others do not matter. But the Hendersons were not finished. Over the next week, several regular customers suddenly stopped coming to the mercantile. Mr. Henderson, the banker, spread word that merchants who continued doing business with Ramon might find their loan terms less favorable. 2 suppliers wrote to say they could no longer provide goods to the store, though they offered no explanation. Ramon tried to hide his worry, but Zelda could see the stress in the tightness around his eyes, the way he pored over the account books late into the night. This is because of me, Zelda said one evening. If I left, they would stop punishing you. Absolutely not, Ramon said firmly. I will not reward their cruelty. We will find new suppliers. We will manage. But managing was becoming harder. Then, one afternoon, Tobias arrived at the store with George Peterson, the old rancher who had spoken up in his defense before. We have been talking, George said without preamble, about what the Hendersons are doing. It is not right and it is not legal. You cannot interfere with someone's business just because you do not like who they associate with. There is not much we can do about it, Ramon said tiredly. Henderson owns the bank. People are afraid of crossing him. Maybe not everyone, Tobias said. George has convinced some of the other ranchers to start buying their supplies exclusively from you. He has also talked to the freight company out of Cheyenne. They are willing to become your new supplier, and Henderson has no influence with them. Why would you do this? Zelda asked George, her throat tight. The old man shrugged. Because it is right. And because I am too old and too ornery to let a puffed-up banker tell me where I can spend my money. Besides, your uncle has always dealt fair with me, and you make better coffee than anyone else in this town. I tried that Mexican chocolate you sold me last month. Damn fine stuff. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Zelda laughed. Thank you, Mr. Peterson, truly. Just George. We are neighbors, after all, or we will be once you and Tobias get hitched and move out to that valley." True to his word, George brought several other ranchers to the mercantile over the following days. They placed large orders, enough to keep Ramon's business afloat despite Henderson's interference. Word spread that the ranchers had chosen sides, and gradually other people began coming back, unwilling to sacrifice convenience and fair prices for Henderson's petty grudge. The banker tried other tactics. He complained to the sheriff that Zelda was operating a restaurant without proper permits, based on nothing more than the fact that she sometimes shared her cooking with neighbors. The sheriff investigated, found no restaurant, and dropped the matter. Henderson tried to have Ramon's business license revoked on a technicality, but the territorial governor's office rejected the request. Through all of it, Tobias was Zelda's rock. He worked on their house during every spare moment, and when he could not be there, he was at the mercantile, helping with heavy lifting or deliveries, making sure everyone knew he stood with her. "You are sacrificing so much for me," Zelda said one evening as they sat on the partially finished porch of their new home. The sun was setting over the valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I am not sacrificing anything," Tobias replied. "I am choosing the life I want." "Choosing you. That is not a sacrifice, Zelda. That is a gift." She leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the smell of sawdust and honest sweat. "I love you," she said quietly. The words had been building in her heart for weeks, and now they spilled out like a confession. Tobias turned to her, his eyes bright. "I love you too. I think I have from the moment I saw you sweeping that boardwalk, looking so brave and so alone. I wanted to make sure you never felt alone again." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Zelda felt her whole world shift into focus. This was where she belonged. Not in Santa Fe, not in some theoretical future, but here in this valley with this man. They were married in late August, on a Sunday afternoon in the little church. Tobias had wanted to wait until the house was completely finished, but Zelda convinced him she did not need perfection. She just needed him. The guest list was smaller than a typical wedding. Martha Henderson and her circle refused to attend, of course, and several other prominent families stayed away. But the church was still half full. George Peterson was there with his wife. The Fletcher brothers came, along with most of their ranch hands. Mrs. Cooper closed her restaurant for the afternoon to attend. Sarah Williams and her husband sat in the front row. Even the sheriff showed up, perhaps feeling guilty about investigating Zelda on Henderson's orders. Ramon walked Zelda down the aisle, pride shining in his eyes. She wore a new dress she had sewn herself, white cotton with delicate embroidery along the hem and sleeves, and the traditional ribbons in her hair. She had sewn her mother's silver cross into this dress too, keeping that piece of home close to her heart. Tobias waited at the altar in his best suit, which he had clearly bought new for the occasion. His face lit up when he saw her, and Zelda felt tears prick her eyes at the love she saw there. The Reverend kept the ceremony short and simple. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Tobias kissed her with such tender joy that several people in the congregation wiped their eyes. The reception was held at the mercantile, with tables set up in the street outside. Zelda had cooked for days, preparing dishes from her childhood alongside traditional Wyoming fare. There were tamales and enchiladas, beans cooked with cumin and cilantro, fresh tortillas, and a rich chocolate cake flavored with cinnamon. There was also roasted beef, potato salad, cornbread, and apple pie. People ate with enthusiasm, many trying Zelda's cooking for the first time. She watched nervously as George Peterson bit into a tamale, then his face broke into a grin. "Damn, girl," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. If this is what foreign food tastes like, we have been missing out." Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Zelda felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Maybe not everyone would accept her, but these people, the ones who mattered, they were trying. As the sun set and someone produced a fiddle, Tobias led Zelda into the street for their first dance as husband and wife. She had taught him some of the steps from Spanish dances, and he had shown her the reels and jigs he had learned in Iowa. They combined the styles into something uniquely their own, and soon other couples joined them. Late in the evening, as they were finally preparing to leave for their new home, Martha Henderson appeared at the edge of the celebration. She stood in the shadows, watching with an expression Zelda could not quite read. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowd. Then Martha turned and walked away, and Zelda decided she did not care what the woman thought anymore. She had Tobias, and she had a community that was slowly learning to embrace her differences. That was enough. Tobias had borrowed a wagon for the occasion, and he helped Zelda climb up onto the seat. Their belongings were already packed in the back, everything she owned in the world, ready to start this new chapter. Ramon hugged them both, his eyes wet with tears. "Be happy, Nina," he whispered to Zelda. "Your parents would be so proud of you." The ride to the valley took an hour under the stars. Tobias had finished the house just 2 days before, working dawn to dusk to make sure it was ready. When they arrived, he carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. Inside, lantern light revealed a cozy main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a real cook stove that Tobias had hauled from Cheyenne, and the bedroom he had built with such care. Wildflowers sat in a jar on the table, and the bed was made up with a beautiful quilt that Mrs. Peterson had given them as a wedding gift. "It is perfect," Zelda breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "You built this with your own hands." "For you," Tobias said. "For us." That night they made love for the first time, tender and awkward and beautiful. Afterward they lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the wind whisper through the valley. "Are you happy?" Tobias asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Zelda replied honestly. "When I came to Shoshone City, I thought I had lost everything, but I found you. I found home." He kissed her forehead. "This is just the beginning, Zelda. We are going to build something amazing here." The first year of their marriage was hard work, but deeply satisfying. Tobias continued working at the Fletcher Ranch to earn steady money while they established their own herd. He had bought 10 head of cattle with his savings, and George Peterson sold him 10 more at a generous price. It was not much, but it was a start. Zelda threw herself into making their house a home. She planted the garden she had dreamed of, using seeds from her mother that she had carefully preserved. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans, all the vegetables she had grown up eating. She added flowers too, bright marigolds and zinnias that brought color to the Wyoming landscape. She even managed to coax a small rose bush to life, planting it near the porch where she could tend it carefully. In the fall, when the garden produced its first real harvest, Zelda preserved everything she could, filling jars with pickles and salsas and conserves. She began selling some of her preserves through Ramon's Mercantile, and to her surprise, they sold quickly. Even some of the women who had been coolest to her began requesting her recipes. Sarah Williams became a genuine friend. She came out to the valley regularly, bringing her young daughter and staying to help with whatever projects Zelda had going. In exchange, Zelda taught her embroidery and cooking techniques. Sarah's husband, Thomas, became friends with Tobias, and the two couples began having Sunday dinners together. "I am sorry I did not speak up for you earlier," Sarah confessed one afternoon as they worked together in the garden, pulling weeds. "When everyone was gossiping, I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid. Martha Henderson can make life very difficult for people who cross her." "You are here now," Zelda said gently. "That is what matters." "You are so brave," Sarah said. "I do not think I could have endured what you did with such grace." "I did not feel graceful. I felt scared and angry most of the time. But you did not let them break you. That is brave." As winter approached, Tobias and Zelda settled into the rhythms of ranch life. The cattle needed constant care, fences needed mending, firewood needed cutting. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, falling into bed exhausted but satisfied. On Christmas Eve, they hosted dinner for Ramon and the Petersons and the Williams family. Zelda cooked a feast, blending traditions from her childhood with the foods her neighbors knew. There were tamales and pozole alongside roasted turkey and mashed potatoes. She made bizcochitos, the anise cookies her mother had always baked for Christmas, and everyone agreed they were the best cookies they had ever tasted. After dinner, they sang carols and George Peterson produced a harmonica. The children played near the fireplace while the adults talked and laughed. Looking around the room at these people who had become her family, Zelda felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. Later that night, alone with Tobias, she shared the news she had been holding close for several weeks. "I am going to have a baby," she said quietly. Tobias went very still, then grabbed her and spun her around, both of them laughing. "Truly? When?" "Late spring, I think, maybe early June." He set her down gently, suddenly careful. "Are you well? Do you need anything? Should you be working so hard?" "I am fine," Zelda assured him, touched by his concern. "Women have been having babies forever. I am strong." But in the privacy of her own heart, she was terrified. Childbirth was dangerous on the frontier, and she had no mother or sisters to guide her through it. Sarah Williams promised to help when the time came, and Mrs. Peterson, who had delivered half the babies in the county, offered her services as midwife. The town's reaction to her pregnancy was mixed. Some people warmed to her, seeing the baby as proof that she and Tobias were building a real life together. Others used it as fresh fodder for gossip. Martha Henderson made pointed comments about mixed children and the challenges they would face, but Tobias refused to let the gossip touch them. "Our child will be loved," he said firmly. "That is all that matters." As Zelda's belly grew through the winter and into spring, the town gradually shifted. It was not a dramatic change, but a slow thawing. More people began speaking to her at church. The new schoolteacher, a young woman from Boston, actively sought out Zelda's friendship, fascinated by her background. Several ranchers' wives asked for her advice on gardening in the difficult Wyoming soil. Even Martha Henderson seemed less actively hostile, though she certainly was not friendly. Perhaps she had realized her campaign to drive Zelda away had failed, and she was tired of fighting. In late May, on a warm afternoon when the cottonwoods were thick with leaves, Zelda went into labor. Sarah came immediately, and Mrs. Peterson arrived an hour later. Tobias was banished to the porch, where he paced anxiously with Thomas Williams and George Peterson, who had shown up uninvited to provide moral support. The labor was long and difficult. Zelda had never known such pain, waves of it that seemed to tear her apart. She called for her mother, sobbed in Spanish, begged for it to be over. Sarah held her hand and wiped her forehead with cool cloths. Mrs. Peterson remained calm and competent, guiding her through each contraction. Finally, as the sun was setting, the baby came. A son, red-faced and squalling, perfect in every way. Mrs. Peterson cleaned him up and placed him in Zelda's arms, and she felt her heart crack open with love so fierce it was almost painful. "You have a boy," Sarah called out the window to the men, and Zelda heard Tobias whoop with joy. He burst into the room moments later, still muddy from pacing in the yard, and froze when he saw his son. "Can I hold him?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. Zelda handed the baby over, and Tobias cradled him with such tenderness that she fell in love with him all over again. "What should we name him?" she asked. They had discussed names for months but had never settled on one. Now, looking at his son's tiny face, Tobias said, "Matthew, after my father." "Matthew Ramon O'Brien," Zelda said. "So he carries both our families." "Perfect," Tobias breathed. Matthew was a healthy, hungry baby who quickly became the center of their universe. Tobias proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with his son during fussy nights, singing silly songs, making faces to elicit smiles. When he had to work, he did so quickly and efficiently so he could get back to his family. The town embraced Matthew in a way they had never fully embraced Zelda. People who had been coldly polite suddenly became warm, stopping them after church to admire the baby, bringing gifts, offering advice. It hurt sometimes that her son was granted acceptance that had been denied to her, but Zelda tried not to dwell on it. The important thing was that Matthew would grow up in a community that welcomed him, that he would never feel the isolation and otherness that had marked her first months in Shoshone City. As Matthew grew from infant to toddler, the O'Brien ranch prospered. Their herd had grown to nearly 50 head, and Tobias was able to quit his job at the Fletcher Ranch to work their own land full-time. They built a small barn and a chicken coop. Zelda's garden expanded every year, and her preserves were now sold in 3 mercantiles in the county. She also began teaching cooking classes from her home, showing interested women how to make the dishes of her childhood. What started as a favor to Sarah Williams grew into a regular gathering, with women riding out to the valley every other week to learn new recipes and techniques. The classes became as much about socializing as cooking, and Zelda found herself at the center of a community of women who valued her knowledge. When Matthew was 2, Zelda became pregnant again. This time, the news was greeted with universal celebration. Even Martha Henderson stopped them outside church to offer congratulations, though her smile did not quite reach her eyes. Their daughter was born on a cold December morning, arriving much faster than Matthew had. Tobias barely had time to fetch Mrs. Peterson before the baby was crowning. She came into the world screaming her displeasure at the cold, a tiny fierce thing with dark hair and her mother's brown eyes. "Elena," Zelda said immediately. "For my mother." Elena Rose, Tobias added. "After the rose bush you have been nursing along all these years." Matthew, now an energetic 2-year-old, was fascinated by his sister. He wanted to hold her constantly, to show her his toys, to tell her long toddler stories she could not possibly understand. Zelda watched her children together and felt a gratitude so profound, it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. This was the life she had built. Not the one she had planned back in Santa Fe, but something better and richer and more complex. She had a husband who loved her unconditionally, children who would grow up knowing both sides of their heritage, land that was producing and prospering, and a community that, slowly and imperfectly, had learned to make room for her. The years passed in the comfortable rhythm of ranch life. Matthew grew tall and strong, fascinated by the cattle and the horses, eager to work alongside his father. Elena was quieter but just as determined, spending hours in the garden with her mother, learning the names of plants in both English and Spanish. Zelda taught both children about their heritage, telling them stories of their grandparents and great-grandparents, teaching them Spanish, showing them the dances and songs and traditions she had learned as a child. Tobias supported this completely, often joining in the lessons, trying to learn Spanish himself with varying degrees of success. but she also made sure they knew their father's heritage. They learned the songs from Iowa, the stories of Tobias's parents, the traditions he had grown up with. The children were a bridge between two worlds, and they navigated it with an ease that sometimes astounded Zelda. The town continued to change around them. Martha Henderson's father died when Matthew was 5, and without his backing, Martha lost much of her influence. She eventually moved to Cheyenne to live with a married daughter, and her departure eased some of the lingering tension in Shoshone City. New families moved into the area, people from varied backgrounds who were less concerned with enforcing rigid social norms. A German family established a bakery. A Chinese man opened a laundry and vegetable garden. A black family from Kansas filed a homestead claim near the Peterson Ranch. The town was slowly becoming more diverse, and that diversity made it stronger. George Peterson became Matthew's honorary grandfather, teaching the boy to ride and rope, to read cattle and weather, to negotiate the challenges of ranch life. When George died peacefully in his sleep at age 76, Matthew was one of the pallbearers at his funeral, though he was only 14 and cried through the entire service. Sarah Williams remained Zelda's closest friend. Their children grew up together, and when Sarah's husband Thomas died in a ranching accident, Zelda and Tobias supported her through the grief, just as she had supported them through challenges over the years. Ramon continued running the mercantile into his 70s, finally retiring and selling the business to a young couple from Denver. He moved out to the O'Brien Ranch, living in a small cottage Tobias built for him near the main house. He spent his remaining years playing with his great-niece and great-nephew, tending a small garden and telling stories about the old days. When he died at age 79, Zelda mourned the loss of the last direct link to her childhood. But she also felt grateful that he had seen her happiness, that he had known the life she had built was good and full. Matthew married at 23, choosing a kind young woman named Lucy who had grown up on a neighboring ranch. They built a house on the northern edge of the O'Brien property and started their own herd. Within 2 years, they had given Zelda and Tobias their first grandchild, a boy they named Tobias Ramon, keeping the tradition of honoring both sides of the family. Elena, at 20, shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to go to normal school in Cheyenne to become a teacher. Zelda's first instinct was to refuse, to keep her daughter close and safe. But Tobias reminded her that they had raised Elena to be independent and strong. "She is like you," he said gently, "brave enough to step into an uncertain future because she believes in something." So they let Elena go, and she thrived in Cheyenne, graduating at the top of her class. She returned to Shoshone City and became the head teacher at the small school, beloved by students and parents alike. She married at 25, a doctor who had recently moved to town, and continued teaching even after they had children of their own. Zelda and Tobias grew old together in the valley they loved. Their cattle operation became one of the most successful in the county. Their garden was legendary, producing vegetables and flowers that seemed to defy the harsh Wyoming climate. Their home was always full of children and grandchildren, noise and laughter and love. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the town held a celebration in their honor. Nearly everyone in Shoshone City attended, a testament to how much things had changed since that first difficult year. People gave speeches about Tobias's integrity and work ethic, about Zelda's contributions to the community through her cooking classes, and her fierce advocacy for the local school. The new minister, a progressive young man who had been barely born when Zelda first arrived in Wyoming, gave a short address. "The O'Briens represent the best of what our community can be," he said. They took differences that some saw as divisions and turned them into strengths. They proved that our diversity makes us richer, not poorer. They built a life on love and mutual respect, and that life has blessed all of us. That night, alone in their bedroom, Zelda and Tobias lay together in the darkness. His hair was gray now, and his hands were gnarled from decades of hard work. Her face was lined, and her body carried the marks of age and childbearing. But when he looked at her, his eyes still held that same warmth and love she had seen on the day they met. "Do you remember when you first came to the mercantile?" Tobias asked softly. "You looked so fierce and so scared at the same time." "I remember thinking you were the first person in this town to actually see me," Zelda replied. "Not just the foreign girl everyone was talking about, but me, Zelda." "I fell in love with you that day," he confessed. "It sounds impossible, but it is true. I looked at you and thought, there she is, the person I have been waiting for." "I fell in love with you when you defended me to Martha Henderson," Zelda said. "When you said my differences made our home richer. No one had ever valued me like that before." "Your differences do make everything richer," Tobias said. "This valley, our children, this whole community, we are better because you are here. I am better because you are here." She kissed him, this man who had chosen her when it would have been easier to choose someone else, who had stood beside her through every challenge, who had built a life with her that exceeded her wildest dreams. "I love you," she whispered. "I will always love you." "And I will always love you," he replied. They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done thousands of times before, secure in the knowledge that whatever time they had left, they would face it together. The years continued their gentle passage. Grandchildren became teenagers, then adults. Great-grandchildren arrived. The ranch was eventually passed to Matthew, though Zelda and Tobias continued living in the house Tobias had built so many years ago, the house that had been the foundation of their life together. Tobias died at age 79, peacefully in his sleep, with Zelda holding his hand. He had lived long enough to see his great-grandchildren, to know that the legacy he and Zelda had built would continue for generations. The entire town turned out for his funeral, and the line of people waiting to pay their respects stretched down the street. Zelda mourned him deeply, but she also felt grateful for the life they had shared. 53 years of marriage, decades of laughter and work and love. She had been blessed beyond measure. She lived for another 7 years, surrounded by family, still tending a small corner of her beloved garden even when her body protested the effort. She taught her granddaughters the recipes her mother had taught her, made sure they knew the stories of their ancestors, both the Martinez family and the O'Briens. On a warm June morning, shortly after her 84th birthday, Zelda died in the bedroom she had shared with Tobias. Elena was with her, holding her hand, and the last thing Zelda saw was the valley through her window, green and lush and alive with possibility. She was buried next to Tobias on a hillside overlooking their land. The entire town came to say goodbye to a woman who had arrived as an unwelcome outsider and died as one of the most respected members of the community. At the funeral, Elena stood to speak, her voice strong despite her tears. "My mother taught me that our differences are gifts, not burdens," she said. She lived that truth every day, even when it was hard, even when people made it clear she was not welcome. She refused to make herself smaller so others would be more comfortable. And in doing that, she made this whole town bigger, richer, more compassionate. Elena looked out at the crowd, at the diverse faces gathered to mourn. "My father used to say that my mother's differences made our home richer. He was right. Her differences made all our homes richer. We are better people because Zelda Martinez O'Brien lived among us. We are a better community because she refused to give up on us, even when we did not deserve her patience. The service ended with a mariachi band that Matthew had hired from Cheyenne, playing the songs Zelda had loved as a child in Santa Fe. The music drifted across the valley, bright and joyful, a celebration of a life well lived. Years later, when Alina's own grandchildren asked about their great-grandmother, she would tell them the story. About a brave young woman who came to a hostile town with nothing but a satchel and a dream. About a good man who defended her when no one else would. About the life they built together through hard work and love and stubborn determination. "Your great-grandfather used to say that differences make us richer," Alina would tell them. And he was right. Look at all of us, gathered here together. We carry blood from Spain and Ireland, traditions from Mexico and Iowa, languages and foods and stories from all over. We are richer because Zelda and Tobias had the courage to build a family that honored all those differences. The ranch remained in the O'Brien family for generations, a testament to what Zelda and Tobias had started on that piece of land. The house Tobias built was carefully preserved, and family members made pilgrimages there to remember where they came from. The garden Zelda had planted with seeds from her mother was maintained, expanded, cultivated with love. And in the town of Shoshone City, Wyoming, where a young woman had once been mocked for her foreign ways, children grew up learning her recipes in school cooking classes. Her story was taught as local history, an example of courage and perseverance. The community center was named after her and Tobias, honoring the partnership that had helped shape the town's character. Zelda's arrival had changed Shoshone City, slowly and imperfectly, but profoundly. She had forced people to confront their prejudices, to question their assumptions about who belonged and who did not. And though that change had been painful and difficult, it had ultimately made the town stronger, more welcoming, more truly American in its diversity. The valley where Tobias had first brought her, where he had shared his dreams and his heart, remained as beautiful as she had remembered. The creek still ran clear through the cottonwoods. The grass was still lush and green in spring. Deer still grazed in the early morning light. And if you stood very still on the right kind of evening, when the wind whispered through the valley just so you could almost hear them. A man and a woman, building a house together, planning a garden, dreaming of the future. Laughing at shared jokes, arguing about the best way to fix a fence, falling more deeply in love with each passing day. Their story was one of love conquering prejudice, of courage in the face of hostility, of two people choosing to build something beautiful together, despite all the voices telling them it could not be done. It was a story of the American West in all its complexity, its cruelty and its possibility, its rigid traditions and its radical potential for reinvention. Most of all, it was a story about the simple truth that Tobias had spoken all those years ago, the words that had changed everything. Her differences made their home richer, made their family richer, made their community richer, made their lives infinitely richer than they ever could have been without her. And that truth, hard-won and carefully tended, flourished in that Wyoming valley for generations. A garden more beautiful and more enduring than anything Zelda could have imagined that first dusty day when she stepped off the stagecoach into an uncertain future. Their love story became legend, passed down through the family and the community, a reminder that the bravest thing you can do is choose love over fear, inclusion over exclusion, connection over division. That the people who seem most different from us often have the most to teach us. That home is not a place you find, but something you build, brick by brick, day by day, with the person who sees you for exactly who you are and loves you not despite your differences, but because of them.